3 ancient weapons you wouldn't survive. When we think of terrifying weapons, we usually imagine guns, tanks, or missiles. But long before modern technology, ancient civilizations created weapons so brutal and effective that you probably wouldn't survive facing them. Today, we will look at 3 of the deadliest ancient weapons, tools of war that shaped empires and terrified enemies. First, let's start with the Spartan Spear, also known as the Daru. At nearly 8 feet long, this was the main weapon of the Greek hoplite. Hoplites were citizen soldiers, heavily armed and armored, who formed the backbone of the fighting force in ancient Greece. Picture rows of these soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in a phalanx formation, each one holding his spear like a giant pointed shield. The distance between the tips of their spears was only about 2 feet, meaning an enemy soldier had almost no room to maneuver without getting impaled. And when all those soldiers charged forward in unison, the effect was devastating. The front rank of the phalanx held their spears tight, forming a dense wall of sharpened iron tips. When they lunged, it was like being stabbed by a thicket of bayonets. And if an opponent managed to get past the first rank, they'd find themselves facing another wall of spears held by the second rank, and then another behind them. It was almost impossible to survive a direct assault on a well-disciplined phalanx. But the danger wasn't over even after breaking through the spear wall. Because while the tip of the dory was designed for thrusting, the butt of the spear was spiked with bronze, a vicious finishing move that could crush bones with ease. Now, imagine the scene. A soldier with a sword raised, parrying the thrust of a Dorian spear. In that split second, he sees the spear drop and the bronze, but spike comes swinging in his direction. There's nowhere to dodge such a blow. A skilled warrior might deflect it, but the impact would still send tremors up his arm. Even a glancing blow could shatter a bone. But perhaps the worst part of facing a Spartan phalanx wasn't the individual weapons or the skill of the soldiers, it was their discipline. Spartans were trained from childhood to fight as a team, and the phalanx was their masterpiece. They didn't just charge headlong into battle. Their movements were precise and coordinated, a testament to years of practice. The Spartan phalanx was more than a group of warriors. It was a single organism, a predator that struck with the precision of a viper and the power of a charging bull. Now let's see something that could end a battle before it even started. The Greek fire. This was an incendiary liquid developed by the Byzantine Empire around the 7th century AD. It was a mixture of chemicals that ignited on contact and burned fiercely. But what makes Greek fire truly terrifying is how it was deployed. Naval warfare at the time was a close-quarters affair, and Greek fire changed everything. Ships would spray it from siphons onto their opponents, unleashing a torrent of fire that could engulf a ship in seconds. For sailors, it must have been like being trapped in a burning oven. Wooden ships were especially vulnerable, going up in flames as quickly as they were hit. But Greek fire didn't need to land a direct hit. The spray could reach several yards, covering an entire deck in its fiery embrace. And once ignited, the flames were impossible to extinguish. Water only made things worse, spreading the burning liquid and making the fire more intense. To the Byzantines, Greek fire was more than a weapon, it was a miracle. The formula was supposedly given to them by a divine being, hence the name. Its appearance on the battlefield was a sign of divine favor, and the enemy had no hope of salvation. For anyone facing Greek fire, surrender was often the only option. Finally, let's talk about the weapon that ended many a life even after the battle was done. The Scythian poisoned arrow. The Scythians were a nomadic people who lived on the steppes of Eurasia between the 7th century BC and the 3rd century AD. They were fierce horse archers who raided the empires to the south, and when they went to war, they brought a rain of death down on their enemies. The Scythians were masters of archery, and they took out their targets with deadly accuracy, but their skills were matched by the viciousness of their weapons. Scythian arrows were tipped with a deadly mix of snake venom and rotting animal blood. A wound from one of these arrows was a death sentence. Even if the victim managed to stay conscious, the pain was unbearable. The venom would spread through their veins, causing convulsions and paralysis. As the poison took over, the victim would struggle to breathe until their lungs filled with fluid and they suffocated. There was no antidote, no treatment that could stop the progress of the poison once it entered a body. A small prick from a Scythian arrow was as good as a murder. For their enemies, facing the Scythians was a nightmare, knowing that a single brush of an arrow could bring death within hours. It made any encounter a desperate gamble. These ancient weapons may not look like modern firepower, but they were terrifying in their own right. Spears that turned men into walls of death, flames that swallowed ships whole, arrows that killed long after battle, and machines of war that crushed cities. If you were unlucky enough to face them, you probably wouldn't survive. Which of these ancient weapons do you think is the most terrifying? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.